Psychology of people who don't care about the Super Bowl. Here's something most people never stop to think about. This Sunday, over 100 million people will be glued to their screens, yelling, cheering, pacing their living rooms like the outcome personally determines their future. And at the exact same time, there's another massive group of people who feel absolutely nothing. No excitement, no irritation, no resistance. Just total emotional neutrality. Not the "I hate football, look at me" crowd. Not people trying to sound edgy or superior. I'm talking about people who experience the Super Bowl the same way you might experience competitive butter sculpting. You're aware it exists. You acknowledge other people care. And then your brain quietly moves on. And that disconnect isn't random. It's psychological. Because here's the first thing most people get wrong. Caring about sports is not a default human setting. Your brain is not born preloaded with a touchdown response. There's no universal sports chip installed at birth. What actually drives Super Bowl obsession is a complex mix of identity, social conditioning, emotional stimulation, and neurological reward systems, and not every nervous system responds to those inputs the same way. When people become deeply invested in the Super Bowl, what's happening under the hood is something psychologists call basking in reflected glory. Basically, your brain gets a hit of dopamine when your team wins even though you didn't train, play, sweat, or take a single hit. You just happen to emotionally align yourself with a group wearing the same colors. Your brain treats that win as symbolic self-validation. For people who don't care about the Super Bowl, watching that process happen in others feels strange, not offensive, not confusing, just ineffective. The trigger simply doesn't fire. And there's solid research behind this. Studies in the Journal of Consumer Psychology and related fields show that people have vastly different optimal stimulation levels. Some brains crave intensity noise, emotional spikes, suspense, dramatic swings. Other brains experience that same intensity as draining or overwhelming. Neither is better, neither is broken. They're just tuned to different frequencies. So when someone says they don't care about the Super Bowl, they're often not rejecting fun, tradition, or social connection. They may simply have a nervous system that prefers lower intensity engagement. For them, a 3-hour game filled with constant momentum shifts, crowd noise, emotional whiplash, and manufactured stakes doesn't feel exciting. It feels exhausting. And this ties directly into something deeper: tribal psychology. Humans survived by forming groups. Sports are one of the most socially acceptable ways modern society still activates that ancient us versus them circuitry. My team won. Their team lost. The emotional patterns mirror ancient in-group and out-group dynamics almost perfectly. But not everyone experiences that tribal pull with the same strength. Some people satisfy their need for belonging elsewhere through close friendships, book clubs, creative communities, niche online forums, or interests so specific they barely exist outside the internet. They're not anti-community. They've just found community in places that don't involve memorizing quarterback stats or arguing over whether a catch was technically a catch. And then there's another psychological factor most people never consider: locus of control. Some people are comfortable investing emotionally in things they can't influence. The experience itself is the reward. Others strongly prefer environments where effort leads to outcome. Think about what watching the Super Bowl actually involves. You shout at a screen. You wear lucky clothes. You mentally will a field goal into existence, and none of it changes the result. For some people, that emotional ride is the entire point. For others, it feels fundamentally unsatisfying. They'd rather put their emotional energy into areas where their actions produce direct results. Neither mindset is wrong. They're simply different psychological orientations. Now add modern life into the mix. Notifications, deadlines, money stress, endless news cycles, constant digital noise. For a lot of people, the Super Bowl isn't a break from stimulation. It's another demand on attention. Another event asking you to care loudly, emotionally, and on schedule. And for people who are more neurologically sensitive, roughly 1 in 5 adults, according to psychological research, Super Bowl parties can feel like a sensory endurance test. Bright screens, crowds, noise, overlapping conversations. What feels like celebration to some feels like overstimulation to others. And then there's uncertainty. Sports are built on unpredictability. That's the appeal. But people vary dramatically in how comfortable they are with uncertainty and suspense. For some, not knowing what's going to happen creates excitement. For others, it creates stress. They're not enjoying the tension. They're enduring it. Combine that with the fact that the outcome has zero impact on their actual life. And suddenly, 3 hours of manufactured suspense feels less like entertainment and more like voluntary anxiety. It's the same reason some people love horror movies and others avoid them entirely. Different nervous systems experience stress differently, even when it's just for fun. And finally, there's the cultural layer. The Super Bowl isn't just a game anymore. It's a ritualized spectacle: commercials, halftime shows, themed food, collective commentary. If football already doesn't resonate with you, the added hype can make the disconnect worse. You're surrounded by people performing enthusiasm for something you genuinely don't feel. You're expected to participate, comment, react. And that can feel oddly isolating, not because you're alone, but because you're out of sync. But here's the truth most people miss. Sometimes there is no deep psychological explanation. Sometimes people just don't like football. The same way some people don't like cilantro, techno music, or true crime podcasts. We've become so obsessed with explaining every difference that we forget something basic. Humans have different tastes. The expectation that everyone should care is honestly stranger than not caring. What's most revealing is how uncomfortable it makes some people when someone says, "I don't care about the Super Bowl." That defensiveness tells you everything. For many, sports aren't just entertainment, they're identity markers. Rejecting the event can feel like rejecting the group. It's not about the game, it's about belonging. So if you don't care about the Super Bowl, there's probably a mix of factors at play. Lower stimulation preference, different locus of control, lower tolerance for uncertainty, sensitivity to overstimulation, or maybe you just find it boring. All of those are valid. And if you love the Super Bowl, that's equally valid. We don't all experience the world the same way, honestly. That diversity is probably the only reason society works at all. One group loses their mind over a football game. Another group spends the night doing literally anything else, and somehow we coexist. That's the point.